from theCUBE studios in Palo Alto and Boston, bringing you data-driven insights from theCUBE and ETR. This is Breaking Analysis with Dave Vellante.
As RSAC 2025 approaches, key themes are emerging that are set to dominate the world's largest cybersecurity gathering. Industry dynamics are shifting rapidly, from AI enabling higher velocity threats, an intensified platform consolidation debate, high profile M&A, rising interest in AI and agents with kind of tepid adoption within cyber defense, and shifting security budget priorities. Our research shows that while cybersecurity remains a top priority for IT leaders, it is not immune from macroeconomic headwinds. Moreover, geopolitical tensions have heightened perceived and probably actual threats, causing a large portion of customers to change their spending habits. On balance, cybersecurity remains the single most challenging sector in tech, where 100% success is virtually unattainable, and failures can cripple a firm's brand. Hello and welcome to this week's theCUBE Research Insights, powered by ETR. In this breaking analysis, we welcome Erik Bradley to dig into ETR's annual State of Security Research. In this episode, we'll examine the macro picture in cybersecurity. We'll share the shifting spending patterns and priorities exposed in this new research. We'll examine the hype and realities of platform consolidation and share which companies CISOs feel are helping them innovate to fight the fight. Erik, my friend, good to see you. We got a lot to cover.
Yes, we do. It's great to see you again, Dave. Love doing the survey with you.
Yeah, ditto. Always love having this session with you, and looking forward to next week at RSAC. All right, let's bring up let's take a look at the macro here and look at the stock market. We always like to start there. Cyber stocks continue to outpace tech overall. This is a chart comparing year-to-date returns of leading cyber equities against the NASDAQ. We just pick a couple here. And it basically illustrates cyber's resilience and relative strength in 2025. You see CrowdStrike, very strong bounce back from last summer's July 19th incident, leading the pack on year-to-date gains. You got Zscaler, very solid performance through April. The Bug ETF, which is our favorite cybersecurity ETF, significantly outperforming the NASDAQ. Palo Alto is under pressure because of growth and valuation concerns, and a little bit of tepid guidance, yet it was still ahead. We've got this broad market consolidation that is in their favor, and it also is outpacing the NASDAQ. And so overall, cyber stocks, Erik, they remain resilient even amid these macro headwinds.
Yeah, I mean, it's a necessity, right? And we're looking at an environment right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, particularly in the valuation world and the equity world. So when you have something that's an absolute necessity and the data is showing that it's continuing to grow, it's slightly more comfortable to invest in that area than others. I would also state, though, the valuations are a little bit different. So if you look at the US enterprise SaaS comps overall versus security companies are at 9.4 times sales next 12 months, and all of SaaS is at 5.5. So it is a little bit baked in, right? So it's not only that it's a necessity and there's a touch better of an environment for it, the valuations reflect it too. So, a little bit of a mixed bag in that, but definitely outperforming. CIBR is also another great ETF, and it's outperforming the NASDAQ on a year-to-date, 1 year, and on a 5-year basis. The cyber is up 128 versus NASDAQ at 100. So across the board, 100% accurate.
Love it. Love when you tap your former security equities and analyst talents. So appreciate that. Let's take a look at how spending habits have changed. I mean, a key survey stat that you came out with here shows here that 43% of organizations have adjusted their security spending patterns since last year's RSAC. Kind of key takeaways: more than 40% of the firms revisited budget allocations in the past year. Reflects the very rapid shift in the threat priorities and technology adoption. Really signals a dynamic security planning. It's not a static annual budgeting. And this is specifically related to geopolitical tensions, whether they're perceived or real. 43%, Erik, have changed their spending patterns. Amazing.
Yeah, and I think the most telling way to look at that is the 1%, all the way on the left, right? There's only 1% of respondents saying they're reducing their spending, which is just crazy. When you get 500 people taking a survey, you don't see 1% on anything. So yeah, over, 43% are increasing their spend directly due to geopolitical. This harkens right back to your last point about how the stocks are performing better, right? Even in an environment where there's uncertainty, this actually gets boosted, not cut. So the budgets for these are just incredibly resilient. There's no doubt. If I have a minute, I want to show you something else. It wasn't in that slide, but we went one level deeper and we actually asked them if they were seeing increased cyber threats due to this, and it was a lot. 61% said no, they haven't seen increased threats, but 37 said they were preparing for them. Of that group, 40% were seeing increased threats, and almost 10% called it significant. That number jumped among Global 2000 and financials insurance organizations that were seeing more threats across the board. And though it's a lower number, when you're talking about energy and utilities, and we only had about 30, I think, respondents in the survey that happened to be that, so less than 10%. But they had a massive increase in the critical infrastructure. 70% of energy and utilities respondents said that they were seeing an increase in cyber threats. 20% of them characterized it as a significant increase.
I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't have that data, and so I'm glad you injected it because to me, I said, all right, it's perceived or real. It's real. 40% saying they can taste it. That's concerning, and it's definitely going to be something that we're going to be talking about at RSAC. All right, let's take a look at the sector and put it in context. This is a market map. We share this kind of view a lot. It shows the sector spend momentum, or what ETR calls net score. That's a proprietary methodology. That's the vertical axis, and the sector pervasion is on the horizontal axis. That's penetration into the data set. Cybersecurity, you can see where it is, and you might say, okay, well, geez, it's not so hot on the vertical axis. We'll explain that. But it's a very mature market, so it's highly penetrated to the right. And it's fragmented, and you've got this bifurcated market where you've got a lot of specialized vendors across different domains, and a lot of them are legacy with very low net scores, which kind of drags down the sector. So, Erik, you've got this new versus old. We show on this chart, the squiggly lines, ML and AI have sort of taken over. When you go back sort of ChatGPT, you had a lot more sectors above that 40% mark that we show in the red there. Cyber was never up there because of the reasons that I mentioned. Plenty of cybersecurity companies are at or above that mark and have been historically. But again, this underscores the maturity of the sector and the fragmented nature of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I'm glad you brought up some of our sector level data. A lot of times we focus so on just the vendors, but it's very important to take a broader view. And I'm going to start with quarterly, we do a macro view survey where we track overall spending. And the macro view survey that showed that, spending's dropping. It went from a 5.5% increase to about 3.4% increase, which is sizable. So we're in a backdrop where spending's dropping overall. And the TSIS net scores across the board cooled off this survey across the majority of sectors. There were a couple that beat the trend, but most came down a little bit. So like you said, it's a very astute point about the amount of vendors that are in our information security sector. We have over 80 that are in that sector. I would say more than 1/4 of them have a net score of 0 or negative net scores. So without a doubt, there is a legacy group that we would call off on the far right because that's where they sit in our chart. But they are dragging down the overall net score without a doubt. And I think in the next slide, we might show some of the high flyers and some of the ones that are dragging them down. But there are plenty that buck the trend, but we cannot deny that there is a maturing amount of legacy vendors in that sector that are definitely weighing down the overall net score.
Yeah, so let's go to that. Like we say, it is a mature and fragmented market. This is that same kind of market map view, but the beauty of ETR is it got sector level and it's got firm level, and then within firms, it's got product level. And so this is kind of double clicks into that security, and it shows that highly fragmented landscape. I mean, there's so many companies in here, and a lot of specialized vendors across domains. So again, net score on the vertical axis, that's spend momentum. Horizontal axis is penetration with the data set. You can see the two bands that we've created here. One is that top 40% mark. You see Wiz and a couple of other companies over there. over that mark. There were more in the past. Well, CrowdStrike was always up there prior to July 19th last year. It's creeping back up, which is actually quite interesting. You can't even see it because it's off the chart in the upper right. Microsoft is just ubiquitous and consistently over that 40%. So impressive. Okta's doing better lately. Zscaler right on it. But then the bottom line at 0%, you can see, look at how many companies are below that line. You can see in the upper right, the net score and the shared N, how the dots are plotted. And Erik, there's a ton of green in cybersecurity. If this were like storage or some other infrastructure, that'd be just mostly red, across the board. And so you've got to scroll down, here below Google on the interactive tooling that you guys have to actually see the red. So your thoughts on this data?
Yeah, you could see on the bottom there some of the names that were dragging it down, right? Like those are the legacy names, like say a Sophos or Trellix or even a Symantec, and then those type of names, SonicWall. Those are the ones that have such high negative net scores that they kind of weigh down the average. And the high flyers you mentioned, right? Wiz, Rubrik. You got Microsoft. I'd call out Zscaler, Netscope, Cloudflare. Also, all of these names doing extremely well. So yeah, I mean, if we probably took legacy out of this, you would see a very different plotting. But the truth is, there's a lot of large enterprises still using those tools. So we still have to track them. It's important. A quick comment on CrowdStrike. It was at 48% prior to the outage, their net score. That dropped all the way down to 20%. And we saw it incrementally pick up to 23% this survey, not a big jump. And I know the accolades are very high, and we're going to get to it later with the vendor write-ins. So it seems right now there's a little bit of a disconnect between the perception and what we're seeing in our spending intent surveys, because we're still seeing replacement rates at 10%. It's really high. We're talking about an N of 570. So we're still seeing 10% of a large customer base saying that they intend to replace them. So I just don't think they're out of the woods yet.
Interesting. And as we've talked about in the past, the intent to replace and the actual ability to do so is somewhat challenging sometimes because it's sticky. It's kind of like VMware. It's sort of the same dynamic. We'll keep an eye on that. But the beauty of it is you guys track this stuff every quarter, so we can see the time series. Let's take a look at budgets and how things are shifting. Cyber budgets, we kind of a play on shift left. They are shifting right, but the biggest firms are still spending. This graph shows security budgets, moving toward that right. You can see a decrease in those spending 15% or more, a decrease in those 10 to 15%, and then a little bit of an increase in those that are 1 to 5%, and a noticeable increase in those that are staying the same. And then also look at the box on the right. Yeah. Very few IT decision makers and firms in this survey are decreasing spending, to your earlier point. And you can see the areas in the box where they're spending. What's your takeaway here?
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time on here, but I'm going to kind of give the high level ones. And basically what we're seeing here is that it's a little bit less than it was last year. So they have come down a little bit over last year. So we have 80% stating that security related budgets will increase over the next 12 months. That was at 87% recorded last year. So it is a slightly coming down. Large organizations, fairly consistent. It was mid-size organizations that had 97% increasing budgets, which I thought was really interesting. Fortune 500 responded, cited the most intent to decrease spend. Decreasing spend among the Fortune 500 was up to 7% versus 0 last year. So when we're talking about uncertainty in a political and economic environment, they're the ones who tend to move fast. They tighten the belts first. So that's a little bit of an issue, right? That Fortune 500 number going from 0 to 7% on decreased spend is something I'm really going to keep an eye on. And then Global 2000 had the highest level of flat spending. So it's the world's largest organizations that tend to be the canary in the coal mine right now. So we'll see what happens. And then that little box was really great that you called out. Cloud security was a top response. 58% of respondents stating it as a driver for their increased security spending. The only other answer we got above 50% was on LLMs and Gen AI protection, which was relatively new. We weren't really even tracking that last year. Then detect and response and vulnerability management came in as well. Interestingly, when we cut only to C-suite, that LLM and Gen AI jumped to the #1 spot, even above cloud security.
Interesting. They get the mandate from the corner office.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's take a look at the top areas of accelerated spending. It's like a bullet list, if you will, these bars of security areas, those domains, and that are seeing the fastest budget growth. Erik, this is a sophisticated methodology that you guys applied. So you need you to explain this in some detail, if you would. What is this, and how did you arrive at these?
Yeah, this is great. I'm glad you put this in because it gets to show how nerdy we are, and we eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff. So this is sophisticated survey ops stuff. What we're looking at here is what's called a max diff. It's jointly done, usually with a conjoint analysis. First step would be max diff and then conjoint. So what we're doing here is if I just asked the CISO what was a priority in security, a good CISO would scoff at me because it's all important, right? You don't tell me to pick. So what we did instead is we randomly grouped 4 of these at a time. And we showed them a series of these over and over and over and asked them to pick which grouping they would prioritize. So by doing that, once we had all of the results of all 500 people doing this, we could determine which one of these individually was the factor in being the priority. Then what we did here is we used a best worst score analysis and simply ranked it. So it is some heavy stuff, but it's fun stuff, and it's just one slice of the things ETR could do with our data and our surveys. But without a doubt, vulnerability management, identity security really ranked higher than everyone else in here. That is a big number, 67 to 57. Data security, endpoint, and cloud were the next tranche, really close. And then kind of lower was DevSecOps. I think that's interesting. I also think we could talk about it another time, but I think CNAP is sort of taking over DevSecOps, where if you have good cloud security across your infrastructure, in your containers, in your writing, that sometimes that separate DevSecOps isn't as necessary. But yeah, very clearly vulnerability management and identity are still the top 2 priorities in the security world.
Great, thank you. I just want to say, I like that technique because you could have asked them to rank, 10, 20 or rate, the rating would come out all the same. The ranking, people get, sick of it and they're like, I don't know. And they can't re-rank. What you did, if I understand it correctly, is you put them in a lifeboat drill with 4 choices, which are easily, the human brain can easily determine that. And you ran that multiple times and then did the analysis to come out with this. So that's great.
Yeah, it's 100% accurate. And then the next step, what we would do is if we wanted to, say we were working with a vendor and they were trying to figure out what features they wanted to put in a new release, which features people would pay more for, which ones are considered table stakes, we could then run that again and figure out which ones were people actually would pay for. So if you and I were going to go roll out a full platformization security play, as everyone wants to, we can determine which components are the most necessary and will move the needle.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about, this whole tools creep. This was the big highlight last year. There's some early evidence that the security, the increase in the number of vendors in the security stack is somewhat slowing. This data, indicates, like I say, somewhat deceleration, the rate at which organizations are adding new security vendors to their stack. So that's a slightly different than last year. Last year they were adding in a more accelerated. Erik's going to dig into that. So you got fewer companies reporting increasing their count. It's an initial signal that consolidation, maybe happening. I mean, it's certainly not definitive, but you've still got a healthy minority that still add these niche solutions. So we're not ready, Erik, to claim victory for so-called platformization. But this is somewhat different from last year, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. The interesting part is that 9% number stayed exactly the same. So we're not seeing traction on people actually decreasing their tools, but we have seen a pause on people increasing them. So this all went from a movement from increase to staying the same. So we haven't yet seen the number of decrease go up. However, this is where it gets interesting. When isolated to just Global 2000 respondents, we are seeing that platformization strategy starting to develop. 16% said they were decreasing in the Global 2000, and only 31% expected an increase among that group. Then when you look at all large organizations, 14% expected to decrease their stack, and then in small, it was only 3%. So we're clearly seeing something here where the world's largest organizations are the ones that are more likely to lead this vendor consolidation first.
I was down at Palo Alto Ignite, I don't know, it must have been 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And I had the pleasure of sitting in a round table with Nikesh Arora and a bunch of other analysts. And he declared, he looked right at me and he declared the end of best of breed. So when I saw this slide, I was like, oh, wow, maybe Nikesh is right. There's 35% to 18%. So this is on the previous slide, they indicated they're going to increase the number of cybersecurity vendors in the SAC. Why? And then the answer here was the second set of bars. We're moving to best of breed approach where we select the best vendor. Look at how much that dropped. And then of course, you pointed out to me, yeah, there's a little bit of a nuance. So at first blush, I said there's real evidence here that Nikesh is right, but explain the nuance. We're going to show it anyway because it sparks the debate on consolidation and platformization, but please explain, Erik.
I will, and let's start off with what maybe would support Nikesh's statements. And we all know he's brilliant and superlative, so it doesn't shock me that he would come out and make that statement to you. I think it's excellent. But first of all, people were given the option to choose that, right? So that drop from 35 to 18% is real. They could have chosen it, and they didn't. So that part is absolutely real. The part I do need to state, and the caveat is, we added some new answer options this year. My security analyst felt like last year I wasn't granular enough, and he asked me to add a couple. So just by doing that, you can never call it a straight apples to apples comp. So yes, they had the option to choose that, and they did not. So that is telling. There is something here. However, what we did see was a lot of that movement shifted over to what people were choosing. We're going more with an MSSP, or we're going more with a partner approach on this. So that doesn't mean that they're not choosing best of breed. That's still true. But what we are seeing is that they're shifting over a little bit more towards a partner. And Dave, if I have a moment, the other thing that's not shown in here, but is in the full report, this one was showing vendors increasing. Now, we did actually take one that was vendors decreasing. It was only 46 of the 500 people said they were decreasing their stack, so a small amount. But those that did, without a doubt, were choosing, we want to consolidate to simplify our stack. That's flat out what they said. We want a more simple pane of glass for observing and monitoring. So very much so on the decrease side, even though it was a small number, we're very clearly seeing the reason is that people need to simplify their stack.
Yeah, I'm looking at that data now in the software, and yeah, it's from like 50% to 76%, yep. So pretty substantial. Yep. All right, cool. Okay, this was quite interesting, where you guys asked, this sort of lists the most desired product or vendor, but you asked if you could completely rebuild your cybersecurity stack, what one product or vendor would you most prioritize? And of course, you go right to the first one. It's like feature. What is that feature? Well, it's not a vendor. It's the features that they want, which came out number one. And we're going to talk about that. And then behind that, again, Microsoft Azure, you're like, wow, that's something we got to talk about. And then of course, CrowdStrike, other, not sure, Palo Alto, Cisco, Fortinet, SentinelOne makes the cut, Zscaler, AWS, interesting, Wiz, Splunk, and then Okta and everything else is going to 1% or lower. But wow, that, Erik, was really interesting. Explain which features you saw as the winner and what you make of this data.
Yeah, I thought it was really fun because, we kind of expected people just to write, a vendor in, but instead they basically went out and they said, these are the things we need. And it's really kind of irrespective of who the vendor is. And the number one came out to either someone saying they needed MFA or identity. We kind of grouped them together because that's all just around identity access, which, by the way, also when we looked at our top priorities, identity was number 2 over, guess what? Vulnerability management. So the second highest write-in, almost in a tie, was either EDR, XDR, or a full XDR platform. Really interestingly, so many times I saw the word platform being used. I saw people say single pane of glass, one complete platform, an EDR, XDR platform. And I had a few CISOs once tell me that the holy grail is to get to that single pane of glass so that I can reduce fatigue and stop staring at 83 different separate systems and miss something. So yeah, right now the top things were identity, vulnerability, and the platformization that Nikesh wants. So we'll see if it gets there. To your point about Microsoft, man, 3 to 5 years ago, there's no way you and I would be sitting here saying that they were the number one desired vendor that somebody would want to rebuild on. So they've come a long way. Kudos to them. And we're seeing it across the board. It's not just in this survey. It's in the TSIS survey. Yeah, we also do our own Magic Quadrant style, where it's product granularity, but based 100% on end user data. Microsoft leads every time. It's across all of the work we do. Microsoft has become a juggernaut in security, period.
And they're so ubiquitous, and you're right, they are trying to take a platform and consolidation approach. It's interesting because you hear so many challenges that people have with breaches around Microsoft, but they keep plugging those holes, so you absolutely can't ignore them. Okay, another sort of complement to the last set of data is which vendors are you see as most innovative. So we take a look at this. As you think about the most innovative cybersecurity vendors, what names come to mind? We talked about the challenges that CrowdStrike had from a net score standpoint, yet they're seen as the most innovative. So that's really notable. Then you got other, then Palo, then Microsoft, Cisco, Fortinet, and then Zscaler, SentinelOne, Wiz. Arctic Wolf, MSSP jumps in there. Cloudflare, pops up as the Darktrace and others. Erik, how do you think about this data?
I love that you called that Arctic Wolf. We don't always track those platform like those MSSP partners. I thought that was a really high number. It jumped out at me as well. But obviously CrowdStrike is the takeaway here. Look at that, 35% calling them the most innovative. So there is no denying how good this company is from an efficacy standpoint. And they're trying to manage through it, right? We know for a fact that they're giving some incentives to people. They're giving away some other features that maybe they'll have to charge for later, kind of kicking the can down the road. Like you said, let's make it even harder. Let's make it even stickier for the people that actually are pissed off at us to stay. So they seem to be doing it because there's a huge dissonance between what we're seeing here in the write-ins and what we're seeing in our spending intentions data. But yeah, really, really high. Nice to see Palo Alto up there, still considered one of the highest, innovative vendors too. Microsoft, I think this is an interesting dichotomy, right? The other question was specifically saying, if you had to rebuild your entire stack, which one vendor would you do it on? Microsoft has the big enterprise license. It offers a lot. That's a very different question than who's the most innovative. So I think that is telling that this data is really accurate and spot on. The most innovative is CrowdStrike and Palo Alto. It's not Microsoft.
What's interesting about the comment on Arctic Wolf, they acquired Cylance, and if you look at the Cylance data in the ETR data set, it's one of those legacy companies that's been pulling down net score, but they're endpoint security. So clearly Arctic Wolf wants to bundle that in. It doesn't want to pay, I don't want to pay CrowdStrike because CrowdStrike's, premium product. They're an MSSP. They got to make a margin. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that acquisition plays out.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There is a part of this survey, we just didn't have all the time in the world today, that we would break out, who would prefer to use outsourcing versus who would prefer to use in-house on a primary and also an exclusive basis. And the people that tend to use outsourcing tend to be more the SMBs. You're not seeing Global 2000 organizations as often say, you know what, yeah, we're willing to let somebody else primarily handle that. So maybe that's why Cylance makes sense for them, right? Because if you're a small, medium business and you're just going to go ahead and outsource it, you don't have the SOC analysts, you don't have the expertise yourself. Maybe you're not going to really care if you're bundling a CrowdStrike versus a Cylance. Maybe Cylance is certainly just good enough for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Dell and CrowdStrike have a very close partnership. Mm-hmm. Dell bundles CrowdStrike into its desktop and laptop, and that's obviously a big SMB play. So it's going to be fun to watch. We're gonna poke at this at RSAC. All right, let's close with what we're watching here at RSAC next week. We've identified 5 critical questions that we're going to monitor. There are going to be many more. We have our CEO series, we have our CISO series, we have our practitioner series. We got Erik Bradley coming on. We got a bunch of analysts coming on. 4 days of coverage on theCUBE at RSAC. So here are some of the things that we're gonna talk about. Will AI force a cybersecurity do-over? At that same Palo Alto Ignite, I had a one-on-one with Nir Zook. And he basically said, essentially, forget everything you've ever learned about cybersecurity, that AI renders existing architectures near useless. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, prior to Gen AI and AI, we could stop 99% of the breaches, and then other 1% humans could pretty much handle. But the problem now is with Gen AI, the bad guys can overwhelm us with challenges, and just humans can't handle it. So you have to fight AI with AI. If you're not an AI company, you're going to fail in cybersecurity. I thought that was really interesting. So that's something that we're going to be watching. What prerequisites are there for agentic data integration? Like John Olczyk says, he's also going to be at RSAC. The hype needs a solid foundation of data, or projects are going to fail. We're looking, as we talked about a lot here, how fast is security platformization happening? Is best of breed really on its way out? We're going to be talking to executives about that and CISOs. And then, we haven't talked about the Google acquisition of Wiz, $32 billion. And what's that going to do to the cloud security dynamics? It's going to bring back M&A. Google obviously stepping up. You got Mandiant, now you got Wiz. They're going to drive security monetization, maybe more like Microsoft. AWS doesn't monetize security as much. I mean, it's got the security lake and things like that, but it's more built into the infrastructure. How does AWS respond, especially as it goes up the stack, further up the stack with things like Q and Connect? And then finally, we talked about this up front, but how are these geopolitical tensions reshaping cybersecurity strategies and the landscape globally? It's a very dynamic situation, Erik. We'll give you the last word.
Yeah, there's so much there to look forward to. We've got a lot going on. There's so much right there that I could comment on. I don't think generative AI is a redo on security. Remember, there's a lot of great security companies that already had AI integrated into the tools, and I'll give CrowdStrike all the credit. They already had it. So now they're being kind of forced to remarket it and ask people to pay for it, when the truth is it was already in their roadmap anyway. That's why they're one of the most innovative vendors. I do believe agentic is the issue. So it's going to be bots fighting bots. Bots are going to be attacking us. Bots are going to be protecting us. So that I definitely believe is the next phase, and I'm looking forward to digging into it. I still think the jury is out on the Wiz Google acquisition. Wiz is an outstanding, incredible company. It's just, when you think about the IDF 8200 unit and the amount of security that they have put out there, it's insane. We'll see if the enterprise, I don't think, is going to have an issue. I think Google might have an issue with some privacy issues when the actual Google regular users start seeing what's showing up on their Chrome and their apps. But from an enterprise perspective, we'll take all the security we can get. Interestingly, I did a report not that long ago on our shared accounts analysis, and Google had the lowest overlap and share with Wiz. It was actually AWS and Azure that had a stronger correlation from a cloud computing standpoint. So that was something interesting. I could bring that on when I'm on your show out at RSAC, and we could talk about it as well. To some of your other points, other aspects of the security survey also touched upon threat telemetry and what data was being collected. So I can bring that out there when you and I are live out at the floor, and we could talk about some of these other aspects as well, Dave. I'm really looking forward to seeing you out there.
Yeah, ditto. I just want to mention, I mean, we're just given a small snapshot of this survey specifically, but of all the data in ETR, it's mind-boggling how much data there is, and there's something for everybody there. ETR.ai to get more information. You guys got a new website out?
If I can, yeah. We just launched a brand new website yesterday, public facing, and there's actually a download form out there for the report. And if anybody sees me out at RSA, want to take a meeting, I'd be happy to give you the report and talk to you about it. But yeah, please check out the new website. Our marketing people worked hard over it.
Awesome. Yeah, congratulations. And then, yeah, we will be at RSAC. It's RSAC now. We have to remember, they're very generous to us. They give us some space, and so we try not to say RSA. But at any rate, we're in Moscone West, in Media Row, back in the left. You can't miss Media Row. It's a great spot, and we'll be going live. We're one of the few outlets that goes live. Maybe a couple other do, but we go live wall to wall. It's always great, Erik. You see a lot of signs like, shh, we're recording, keep quiet. We're like, make noise. So let's bring it. Erik's coming on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. We start Monday, we go all the way through Thursday. We also, on Monday evening with the NYSE, we've got a CUBE After Dark over down at the Embarcadero at the pier, so we're at Lamar. So, hit me up if you want to attend that. Super excited. Erik, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate your time.
You know how much I enjoy this collaboration, Dave. It means a lot to ETR and me specifically. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and thanks to Alex Meyerson, who's on production and manages the podcast, and Ken Schiffman as well. Kristen Martin and Cheryl Knight, they get the word out on social media and in our newsletters, and Rob Hof is our EIC over at SiliconANGLE. Thank you all. Remember, these episodes, they're all available as podcasts wherever you listen. We're up to, I think, 273 now in a row. All you gotta do is search Breaking Analysis Podcast. We publish each week on thecuberesearch.com and siliconangle.com. And email me, david.vellante@siliconangle.com. DM me at @dvellante if you have a pitch. I apologize if I don't get back. I get so many, but pitch me if it's interesting. I'll come back to you. It may be interesting, but it just may not have time, or it may not be a topic that fits. Just now, I'll keep trying. Comment on our LinkedIn post. I always appreciate that. And do check out, again, etr.ai, brand new website. They've got a download of this survey, the great freebie, best survey data in the enterprise tech business. This is Dave Vellante for theCUBE Research Insights, powered by ETR. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time on Breaking Analysis, and we'll see you at RSAC 2025 in San Francisco.